High definition news for Thursday morning, December 4th, 2014. I'm Jeff Kaufman.
It's not fair. What do they not see? How could they possibly not indict? You know, I felt hopeless. I felt like there was not another corner to turn, like there was nothing left for me to fight for.
The widow of a man killed by a police officer's chokehold in New York City reacts to a grand jury's decision not to indict the cop, despite a coroner's ruling that Eric Garner's death was a homicide. And for the second time in 2 weeks, Americans take to the streets to voice outrage at a system they see as gamed against the very people it purports to protect. For the second time in 2 weeks, a grand jury has examined the evidence a prosecutor delivered concerning the death of an unarmed civilian at the hands of a police officer, and for the second time in 2 weeks has voted that no chargeable crime was committed. Last time, Ferguson, Missouri, Michael Brown, Officer Darren Wilson. Yesterday, New York, Eric Garner, Officer Daniel Pantaleo. Just like in Ferguson, reaction to the grand jury's decision came quickly, and it came in the streets. Just like in Ferguson, those demonstrations spread across the country. There were also marches here in Southern California. Unlike in Ferguson, the protests were almost universally peaceful. A diverse, all-races crowd of protesters marched along Manhattan streets, stopping at the Brooklyn Bridge, Times Square, the Lincoln Tunnel, near Rockefeller Center, where police kept the marchers at a distance from the annual Christmas tree lighting, and finally into Grand Central Terminal, where they lay down on the floor in silence to symbolize African-American men killed by police. Police kept their distance, but kept the protesters moving. There were only 30 arrests. I can't breathe! I can't breathe! I can't breathe! Like Hands Up, Don't Shoot in Ferguson, I Can't Breathe has become the symbolic protest chant in this case. It's an echo of the last words of Eric Garner, the 43-year-old Staten Island man whose arrest was captured by a bystander with a cell phone video camera on July 17th. And it is the existence of that video that has fueled much of the outrage over the grand jury's decision.
I didn't do nothing. Where did I go? I didn't sell anything. I did nothing. We sitting here the whole time, minding our business. Everybody standing here, they told me I didn't do nothing. I did not sell nothing.
We've edited the audio only to remove some of the moments in which nobody moves or says anything. The NYPD is there to arrest Eric Garner for selling what are known on the streets as loosies, unpackaged individual cigarettes on which the city tax is not paid. It's a crime that usually draws a ticket and a fine, but the video eventually shows 5 officers participating in the forcible takedown of Garner and an unknown number of others who were present but did not participate. Garner is 6'4" and weighed about 350 pounds. He is clearly out of shape, but he is a giant compared to the officers, who keep their distance until one of them, Daniel Pantaleo, moves in behind Garner, puts his arm around Garner's neck, and tries to take him down. But it takes all 4 of the other officers to bring Garner to the sidewalk, where Pantaleo keeps his arm around Garner's neck and another officer leans on his chest.
Hold on. Don't touch me, please.
Came over.
Not touch me. Damn, man.
All right, stop. Give us your hands, buddy.
Put your hand behind your back. I can't breathe.
I can't breathe, Eric Garner's last words. The coroner said Garner's death was caused by the compression of his neck and chest, and that contributing factors were Garner's obesity and asthma. The coroner ruled it a homicide. All the officers except Pantaleo were granted immunity for their grand jury testimony. Pantaleo testified for 23 hours. He told the grand jury that he did not intend to choke Garner, never thought Garner's life was in danger. Unlike Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson, who said he had no regrets, Officer Pantaleo told the grand jury and issued a public statement saying he felt very bad about Garner's death. Garner's widow, Esau, last night.
The time for remorse would have been when my husband was yelling to breathe. That would have been the time for him to show some type of remorse or some type of care for another human being's life. When he was screaming 11 times that he can't breathe. So there's nothing that him or his prayers or anything else would make me feel any different. No, I don't accept his apology. No, I could care less about his condolences. No, I could care less. He's still working. He's still getting a paycheck. He's still feeding his kids. And my husband is 6 feet under. And I'm looking for a way to feed my kids now.
Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, asked a question many in the community are asking.
I am truly disappointed in the grand jury's decision this evening. I don't know what video they were looking at. Evidently, it wasn't the same one that the rest of the world was looking at. How could we put our trust in the justice system when they fail us like this?
President Obama tried to answer that question yesterday.
Right now, unfortunately, we are seeing too many instances where people just do not have confidence that folks are being treated fairly. This is an American problem and not just a black problem or a brown problem or a Native American problem. This is an American problem. When anybody in this country is not being treated equally under the law, that's a problem. And it's my job as president to help solve it.
Just as in Ferguson, there have been calls for a federal civil rights investigation into Garner's death, and just as in Ferguson, Attorney General Holder announced last night there will be one.
Mr. Garner's death is one of several recent incidents across our great country that have tested the sense of trust that must exist between law enforcement and the communities they are charged to serve and to protect.
One other note from Ferguson, Michael Brown's stepfather apologized yesterday for yelling, "Burn this mother down," after the grand jury's decision not to indict Officer Wilson. Here's a quick roundup of what else is making news this morning. 3 more women have come forward to accuse Bill Cosby of sexual assault. One says Cosby spiked her cappuccino. One says he gave her a pill. Both in the 1980s. Both say they woke up realizing they'd been raped. The third woman says Cosby groped her in the 1970s. The 3 women are represented by Gloria Allred, who suggests Cosby either waive the statute of limitations so the women can sue him, or set aside $100 million and let a judge decide which, if any, of the alleged victims get that money and how much. The day before, a woman sued Cosby for a sexual assault she claims took place at the Playboy Mansion in 1974 when she was 15. This week, Cosby resigned as a trustee of his alma mater, Temple. A new video threatens the murder of another kidnapped American in the Middle East, but this one's not from Islamic State. It's from the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen. The hostage is Luke Summers, who was born in the UK but is an American citizen, a freelance journalist. He was kidnapped in September of last year, and the video says he'll be killed in 3 days. From the High Definition News Data Desk. Good news and bad news on parking meters in the LBC. The good news is that you won't have to dig around for quarters much longer because the City Council voted this week to buy a bunch of smart meters, which take credit and debit cards along with coins. The bad news is that a quarter won't buy you very much, even if you have one. When the new meters go in about 2 months, the rates go up 50 cents an hour to $1.50 an hour downtown and $1 outside of downtown, and up a quarter an hour to 75 cents an hour in Belmont Shore. That sure felt like a lot of rain yesterday, and the drought watchers are calling it the perfect storm. Enough to make a slight, and they emphasize slight, dent in the drought, but not enough to cause widespread flooding and mudslides. The ground is so dry, it's soaked up most of what fell from the sky, but we are still about 10 inches short of normal rainfall in LA this year, and the reservoirs up north, where most of our water comes from, are still at crisis low levels. So keep your nozzles dry, lawn waterers. How time flies when you don't synchronize. Forget to set that nasty alarm? High Definition News is still fresh and warm. You can listen later, anytime, at highdefinitionnews.com. That's HI Definition News, all one word. Now here's some catch-up for your Thursday breakfast. This is some of what might have got past you since yesterday. Over the past 48 hours, we have lost musicians responsible for 2 of the most iconic solos from 2 of the most hard-partying bands in rock and roll history. Ian McKellen died yesterday of a stroke in Austin. McKellen played keyboards for Stevie Winwood's group Small Faces in the 60s. When they broke up, he joined the band that launched Rod Stewart, imaginatively named The Faces. Their biggest hit was Stay With Me, and it contained McKellen's signature moment, the rockin' keyboard. In his autobiography, McKellen tells of the bar the Faces always had on stage, complete with a waiter to serve band members drinks. He wrote, "It saved on time and energy hopping into the wings for refreshments, and also gave us somewhere to go during interminable drum solos." After Stewart went solo, McKellen went on the road with him for a while. He also played on records by the Rolling Stones, Chuck Berry, Pete Townsend, Jackson Brown, Bruce Springsteen, and Warren Zevon, and he toured with Bob Dylan. Ian McLagan, rock and roll piano man, was 69. On Tuesday, the death in Franklin, Tennessee of Bobby Keys, whose name sounds like it should belong to a keyboardist, but no, Bobby Keys was a sax man. You can hear him a-wailin' on records by Chuck Berry, Eric Clapton, John Lennon, George Harrison, Carly Simon, Country Joe and the Fish, Nilsson, Joe Cocker, and Sheryl Crow. He is best known for 4 albums and a dozen concert tours on which he played with the world's greatest rock and roll band. And of all of his work with the Rolling Stones, Keys will be most remembered for this. That's Keys on Brown Sugar. Keys grew up near Buddy Holly's hometown of Lubbock and was inspired to become a musician when he heard his first Buddy Holly record. He could not afford to buy his own guitar, so to join his high school band, he picked up the only instrument left in the band's classroom, a saxophone. It was probably inevitable that Bobby Keys would end up with the Stones. He was born on the same day as Keith Richard, who became his brother from a different mother. They were the hardest partiers in the Stones' hardest partying days. You've heard the legend about the rock band that trashed their hotel room and threw the TV set out the window to the sidewalk several stories below? That was no legend. It was 1972, and the 4 hands heaving the telly out the window belonged to Keys and Richard. Both of them cleaned up in recent years, but Keys told Rolling Stone a couple of years ago that he remained a devoted pothead. Bobby Keys, sax man, was 70. Ryan and Nikki Leonti Edgar were in the middle of their set at the W Hotel in Hollywood on Sunday evening when the short guy in the black and gold jacket, big afro, and sunglasses got up from his seat and jumped on stage. Nobody got in his way, even when he grabbed a guitar and joined in. When the song ended, Big Afro and Sunglasses Guy handed the guitar back, jumped off stage, waved, shook his head, and without a word, walked out of the room. Crystal Lauderdale had the reflexes to shoot video and then post it to YouTube, where the folks at LAist.com saw it, and that's how come you get to hear how Prince rolls at the W Hotel in Hollywood. Finally, if you're like most people, you get a lot of career advice over the course of your life, from family, teachers, friends, bosses. Bosses always seem to think the best time to offer career advice is during the meeting in which they fire you. Or maybe that's just this reporter. But there's one bit of career advice that you're not ever likely to hear because it's just so basic. The advice? Don't be a douchebag. This week, that advice would have been useful to an employee named, let me check this twice so I don't get the name wrong, Santa Claus. Channel 4 reports that 13-year-old Absidy Santos waited in line half an hour on Sunday at the shops in Mission Viejo just to see Claus, who reportedly also works under the alias Kris Kringle. Absidy has autism, so also waiting in line and ready to calm her down if Absidy became overwhelmed, which autism patients sometimes do when they have to wait. Waiting with her was her adorable 5-year-old service dog named Pupcake. Pupcake is a pit bull, and when Santa saw him, he put Absidy and her dog on his naughty list and said he would not meet her. Claus, a.k.a. Kringle, admitted he was afraid of Pupcake because, and this is a quote from the morbidly obese self-employed night shift toy distributor, those dogs eat people. Pretty odd coming from a man whose sources say lives year-round in a polar bear habitat. Just saying. Absidy's family said they'd take Pupcake somewhere so Santa could sit just with Absidy, but let me check so I don't get the facts wrong. Santa Claus still refused to talk with a 13-year-old girl about what she wants for Christmas. Because this is radio, High Definition News now asks that you supply the mental images of Absidy Santos, who is 13, and her cute-as-all-get-out service dog, who we will remind you is totally devoted to Absidy's welfare, and just for extra adorbs is named Pupcake, walking away with sad faces after being rejected by a guy who says he loves every child in the whole wide world. Well, because this is a modern Christmas story, it turns out Santa Claus actually works for an independent contractor, a firm that supplies malls with what might be called minimum wage holiday-appropriate costumed public domain characters portrayed by actors checked against the nationwide sex offender registry. The mall and its vendor are going to make sure Absidy gets her meeting with Santa, a different Santa. That other one's been transferred. Who knew you could transfer Santa? And Pupcake is welcome too. The mall and its vendor also apologized to Absidy and Pupcake. One of those apologies worded in such a way as to almost hide the fact that no apology would have been required if somebody, sometime, had just remembered to give Santa Claus one piece of career advice. Don't be a douchebag. Now you know what we know. I'm Jeff Kaufman, High Definition News.